a pleasure to be here this afternoon with you, and it's such a beautiful day out there. I want to thank you for coming in here and being with us. And thanks as well to Dr. Kandel, to the other panelists, and to James Vaughn for inviting me to come and talk about the Medical Humanities Program. What you see, the image you see there is from our brochure, our flashy brochure that basically proselytizes the value of the medical humanities to potential medical students and pre-meds. So I'm going to begin my presentation today with a very inclusive definition of the medical humanities. And it includes not only the arts and letters, which I think most people would describe as the humanities, but we also talk about the social sciences as being part of the medical humanities approach that we take at the University of Oklahoma. And you can see there that philosophy and ethics figure prominently, so Dr. Spalding should be pleased. And as I was listening to her talk, I also noticed that there's so many commonalities between what you had to say, Dr. Spalding, and the sociology of science, the courses that I often teach. So there are some working assumptions within our program, and one of the first is that the humanities and arts provide insight into the human condition. I don't think you'd have many people object to that. The humanities, the arts, the letters teach us about joy, love, sadness, the human experience, suffering during war and peace, personhood in many senses of the word, familial, political, and existential, our responsibilities to each other, to our nation, to ourselves, to our families, future generations, and that these things really, over time, give us different perspectives on disease, health, and the medical, the practice of medicine. So I'm going to give you an example of this from my own research. I'm writing a biography of Ansel Keys, who is the most important biomedical scientist you've probably never heard of. But I urge you to look him up. That's Ansel with a C, not an S. People always ask, oh, did he take photographs? No. At any rate, this is the Minnesota Starvation experiment. And this was a fascinating story in the history of human subject experimentation. 36 conscientious objectors subjected to a semi-starvation diet of 1,500 to 1,800 calories per day. They lost 24% of their body mass. The Keys who ran this experiment, his goal was to not only delineate the symptoms of biological and psychological symptoms of starvation, but to figure out how to optimally rehabilitate people whose diets had suffered in Europe after the war. And this information collected by Keys was used to guide refeeding efforts in Europe after the war. It was funded by not only the Surgeon General and the Office of Scientific Research and Development, but by the historic peace churches. So the Brethren, the Mennonites, the Quakers were funding this. These were conscientious objector volunteers who'd been sent to civilian public service camps, and they wanted to do something more meaningful than the work that they were doing. So I think, they were a different culture obtained with regard to scientific experimentation, human subject experiments. These individuals were listed by their name, their location. They were heroes, and it's very interesting because what was considered acceptable risk changed during the war, during the Second World War. So I think that that's one of the things. When is it appropriate to suffer, not only for science, but for your religious beliefs as a religious pacifist? What is the experience of suffering in a medical experiment when you have these loftier goals? How does your personhood change, your notion of personhood change when your civil rights may be curtailed by war and by being a religious pacifist and having to go to a civilian public service camp? And what are your responsibilities to your faith, to your God, to your country at a time of war? So I think we can gain some insight into medical experimentation through history, but we also have some other assumptions that we work with, and they include that literature and arts help to cultivate skills of observation, whether those skills are visual or oral. They help develop our powers of analysis and communication. They may stimulate empathy, we hope they do, and self-reflection. And all of these abilities and skills, I think you would probably agree, are really important to delivering humane and effective care. Assumptions that we work with, which is that study in the social sciences helps us. Helps us see how medicine and medical research take place not in some antiseptic room, although they may, but to get them to thinking about the bigger picture. Dr. Spalding mentioned these activities are human activities. They're taking place in specific cultural and social contexts. So how does culture shape the individual experience of illness is another thing that we look at in sociology of medicine, in medical anthropology, and how do different cultures, whether it's popular culture, ethnic cultures, political, institutional, how do they influence the way medicine is practiced? So we had some pretty lofty goals when we started our program, and they were essentially to develop well-rounded, compassionate, empathic physicians, people who would be comfortable in the multicultural clinical context that is just about everywhere these days, individuals who'd also be capable of self-reflection. We wanted to cultivate systemic thinking, so to create physicians who would look at a particular individual clinical case, but who might connect it to larger social issues, social infrastructure, politics. So what some might call non-compliance, if you realize that your non-compliant patient was actually not that affluent and might not have a car, and this is often the case in Oklahoma, that if you don't have a car, it's really hard to get around. I came from the East Coast to Oklahoma back in 1999, and I wondered, how did students get around? How would they go from the Norman campus to the Oklahoma City campus? Coming from the East Coast, my assumption was there must be some public transportation or shuttle service. Why no, they all drove. So there are different things that we have to factor into the diseases people get. And this, the systemic thinking is really big picture thinking, like Dr. Spalding was talking about moments ago. We wanted to train caregivers also who would continue their passion for lifelong learning, individuals to keep that flame of idealism alive, because young people enter medicine, but the pre-medical curriculum and the medical school curriculum sort of beat the humanity out of them, the idealism out of them when they have to get a particular grade on the organic chemistry test, or they're focused entirely on the MCAT. They may lose perspective, and so we wanted to keep that flame alive and honestly just make pre-medical education and even medical school more fun. There was also an unofficial agenda, and that involved keeping the best and brightest Oklahoma pre-medical students in state. Our president was very concerned that we had a sort of brain drain at the high school level, people leaving Oklahoma and moving to other states for their pre-medical education. So we wanted to create a program that would be very appealing to pre-medical students, many of whom have multiple interests and want to follow these interests in literature, art, or languages. We also wanted to draw the strongest pre-med students, not only from Oklahoma, but from the nation to OU, and improve the quality of the student body at OU, make everyone's experience more diverse and enhance the diversity on campus. And we wanted to build bridges between Norman and Oklahoma City. And I'll say there's also an even more hidden agenda, which was me mentioning the possibility of creating this program in my job interview, and never imagining in my wildest dreams that they would say, yeah, what a great idea, let's do it. So it was a fabulous opportunity for me. So once we had these goals, we had to achieve them. And here's the recruitment brochure that we created, sort of flashy brochure we hope might appeal to high school students, that describes the medical humanities program and also includes something about the medical humanities minor. You can see there's student testimonials there on the left. There's some medical students, first-year medical students at their white coat ceremony, and an endorsement from the College of Medicine chair of the Humanities and Medicine curriculum. And let's see. move on. There we go. And here is one of our students. Really, the best recruitment technique is providing access to our students. They're wonderful, wonderful people. They have many interests. And here's Julie Hall, who's Canadian, so she brings the Canadian health system experience to her experience here at OU. And I'm just going to quote here, the Medical Humanities Program has given me an opportunity to consider the broader issues in medicine, the history, ethics, social and economic implications, etc., that are so important to medical practice. The Medical Humanities Scholars Program gives me the freedom and encouragement to take courses that explore the complexities and sometimes the problems with medicine, which I hope will make me a more empathetic and socially conscious physician. Well, we hope so too, and we did not pay Julie to say this, I should say, that's my disclaimer. But our students are so thoughtful, you all, I'm sure, are so thoughtful and articulate, and they have many interests, so it's just a real pleasure to work with them, and they are ultimately our greatest recruiting tool. So once we recruit the students, what sort of experience do they get? There are two parts to our program. One is the Medical Humanities minor. The other is the Medical Humanities Scholars Program. The minor is open to anyone who has an honors grade point average. They take 6 courses or 18 credit hours of work in the medical humanities. They design their own curriculum, and we emphasize foreign spoken language and exposure to non-Western culture through their coursework as well. The Medical Humanities Scholars Program is the 8-year program, the BA-MD program. Students are admitted from high school. There's a rigorous admissions and selection process. They receive provisional acceptance at OU College of Medicine when they're admitted into the program. They do the minor, and they also have a sort of value-added curriculum which involves mentorships, community service, art, travel abroad, shadowing of physicians and non-physicians. So say an acupuncturist or a physical therapist, so they become used to working in teams. And we also have a speaker series. Now, the minor has 50 students right now, as I said, students get to select and tailor their own curriculum, so they can do, virtually any area in the medical humanities. You see healthcare policy, music, and medicine. Many elect to do bioethics. And the Medical Humanities Scholars Program, there are only 20 students. We take 5 to 8 per year. We usually lose some because high school students coming in thinking they're pre-med, some discover new areas at the university they never knew existed, right? Psycholinguistics, they end up becoming speech therapists. Some decide that the animal realm is their cup of tea and they become veterinarians instead. So we lose a few, but we don't regard that as failure. It's simply opening their eyes to new areas that really excite them, which is what it's all about. Greater than 50% of our students come from outside Oklahoma, so we are drawing kids in from all over. And approximately 80% of our out-of-state students, interestingly, remain in-state. They have a really positive experience as undergraduates, and so they stay in-state for medical school, even though they could go elsewhere, back to their home states, for example, and pay a lot less money in tuition. And their studies continue at the College of Medicine, thanks to this man who was the dean of the College of Medicine when I came on in 1999. And this is Jerry Vanetta. He was the dean of the College of Medicine. He's taught a literature and medicine course with an English professor on the OU campus for about 20 years, and his specialty is narrative medicine. And he is a physician who really believes that the humanities and literature in particular offer insights that will increase one's competency and empathy as a physician. So it's a great pleasure to work with him in this. There are several options for medical students once they get to the College of Medicine, and you can see that there are these courses. Jerry Vanetta helped overhaul the curriculum in 2010, and he made these electives in the medical humanities required for all medical students. So they take 16 contact hours, which actually is a fair bit in medical school, and they can choose to study literature in medicine, art in medicine, spirituality in medicine, history of medicine. I teach the history of medicine and the women in medicine courses, and I teach them with physicians, so there's always this dialogue. Just as Dr. Spalding was talking about the scientist and philosopher dialogue, in my case, there's the historian and physician dialogue. There's also Blood and Thunder, which is a magazine run entirely by medical students. It's Blood and Thunder, Musings on the Art of Medicine, contains literature, poetry, short stories, photography, artwork of the medical students, and takes submissions from everyone. So you can apply, and if you have a poem or something that you think is medically related. I am going to close by showing you two young people who are now graduates of the program. On the left, you'll see Kostub Sigdeo. He came to us from Michigan, from Kalamazoo, elected not to go to Big Blue, but to come to OU. And he was a medical humanities scholar. He came in 2000. As he says, well, you also just won the national championship in football, so that made OU a really attractive school as well. But he became a pediatrician, general pediatrician, and Kostub stayed here for his medical education, didn't go back to Michigan, and is currently spearheading the effort to put together the pediatric service at St. Anthony Hospital in Oklahoma City. Alan Wang on the right, his real passion is healthcare reform and bringing access to general care to everyone. He's there pictured lobbying one of our congressmen in Washington, James Langford, trying to get increased funding for graduate medical education and residency programs. And Alan is going to take the year off now. He's in medical school, a third-year student. He's going to take a year off and go to public health school at Harvard. And he's just following his passion, which we saw even as a high school student, which was to reform medical education. So these are the sort of extraordinary students we have, and really what makes it all worthwhile. And I want to thank you for letting me share my story about the Medical Humanities Program at OU with you. So thanks very much.